Carl Jung's Red Book is filled with dialogue, conversations held between Jung and his soul. In a passage near the beginning of the book, the following exchange takes place. I indignantly answered, "Do you call light what we men call the worst darkness? Do you call day night?" To this my soul spoke a word that roused my anger. My light is not of this world. I cried, I know of no other world. The soul answered, should it not exist because you know nothing of it? Should this other world not exist because we know nothing of it? Or rather, should it not exist because the scientific materialist paradigm claims to know nothing of it? Today, I wish to speak to you about this other world through the lens of a synchronicity between two red books, each crafted in the first half of the 20th century. First, let me introduce Jung's Red Book. In his late 30s, the depth psychologist Carl Jung began to have profound visionary experiences, powerful fantasies, expressions of what he called active imagination. He inscribed these visions in a large book, written in black and red letters, accompanied by rich illustrations, bound by 2 covers of red leather. He called the book Liber Novus, which means the new book, but it is known simply as the Red Book. And now let me introduce J.R.R. Tolkien's The Red Book of Westmarch. Tolkien set out to write a mythology, a body of legends, myths, and romantic tales that would be linked in a majestic whole. This mythology eventually took the form of The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and The Silmarillion. But within the world of the mythology itself, these tales have been written out in a book that's been passed on from generation to generation. A large book inscribed in black and red letters, accompanied by rich illustrations, bound by 2 covers of red leather. Tolkien presents himself simply as the translator of this work, and the book is known as the Red Book of Westmarch. So at first glance, the parallel names of Jung's and Tolkien's Red Books just seem to be an odd coincidence. The books actually couldn't share anything in common. On the one hand, we have Jung, one of the founders of depth psychology, an explorer of the unconscious, of archetypes, of the phenomenon of synchronicity, a Swiss man born in 1875. And then on the other hand, we have Tolkien, firmly English, a philologist and medievalist, eventually the famous author of The Lord of the Rings, one of the founders of the genre of fantasy literature, a younger man born in 1892. At first glance, there seems to be little common ground between the 2 men, other than the smoking of pipes, let alone between their work. I came to Jung's Red Book already with a strong background in Tolkien studies, having been an avid explorer of Middle-earth since age 9. When I first encountered Jung's Red Book, I felt like I was looking at a book from Tolkien's world. The style of the calligraphy, the ornamented letters, even the illustrations felt similar. A certain resonance seemed to exist between the 2 bodies of work, a convergence of images, a synchronicity, to use Jung's terminology, a synchronicity of imagination. My dissertation is an exploration of this synchronicity. In it, I demonstrate the numerous parallels between the 2 Red Books, parallels in timing, in imagery, and narrative. These are present despite the 2 men having no direct contact with each other. These correlations could be dismissed as mere coincidence. But what if they're not? What then might they imply about their source, which seems to be accessible through the imagination? In my dissertation, I'm presenting the idea that the synchronicity of the 2 Red Books ontologically demonstrates the reality of the imagination as a collective source of participatory knowledge. I'm also presenting the resonances and some discordancies between Jung's theory of the collective unconscious and Tolkien's notion of fairy, or what Henri Corbin called the mundus imaginalis, the imaginal realm. We access this co-creative source through the imagination. The imaginal realm is both objectively real and also participatively enacted. My third chapter in the dissertation explores the liminal space between worlds. I look at Jung's practice of active imagination, in which you hold in your awareness an image from a dream or a vision until you come into active relationship to it. You can then dialogue with the figures that emerge. You can enter into the drama itself. I'm suggesting that active imagination can be understood not simply as a means of accessing the unconscious in an objective sense, but rather as a form of participation in the collective unconscious. I would posit, drawing in part on Jorge Ferrer's work in transpersonal theory, that active imagination can be understood as a form of participatory knowing. The fantasies that Jung encountered through active imagination can be seen as transpersonal participatory events, a co-creative enaction between the human organ of the imagination and the non-determined archetypal power of the collective unconscious. Now, based on evidence in his writings, it seems Tolkien was also engaging in a similar method to Jung's practice of active imagination, and perhaps also was having visionary experiences that he called fairy dramas. Tolkien spoke of how his stories arose in his mind as given. He would say, "I always had the sense of recording what was already there somewhere, not of inventing." The there somewhere to which he is referring is fairy, the imaginal realm. Jung and Tolkien entered the mundus imaginalis during a time in history and as part of a modern culture that didn't see the spiritual, the numinous, or the imaginal as part of the natural world. They each came of age in an era of disenchantment. The world had been scoured of its angels and demons, its elves, dwarves, and dragons. The starry sky was merely a void, the moon and sun only atoms and energy. Trees were only a source of wood, and high mountains only a repository of coal and minerals. Where did they go, the lost beings who were no longer believable, no longer real? They retreated into the imaginal world to await a time when they might be rediscovered there, seen by those who had eyes to see. The Queen of Fairy, the Anima Mundi, extends an invitation to those who are willing to cross her threshold, to return to that realm and behold its wonders and its terrors. She asks those who tread the pathways of her realm to give her a gift in return, the gift of remembrance. Please record your experience, whether it's in song or tale, in painting or poetry, or in the quiet memories shared with a loved one. Believe that these experiences are real. There's a bridge between here and there, and if you've had the privilege to cross it, leave a trace so that others too may find their way. And someday, when enough people return with eyes and hearts and minds open to the mundus imaginalis, they will remember that this is our world. The two realms have only been falsely separated. The bridge walked between realms doesn't go only in one direction. And perhaps the denizens of fairy can one day return to the natural world. Perhaps we are facilitating the return of the queen to her full domain. Thank you.